All right, everyone. Thank you for coming to my teach-in on the JFK assassination.
Thanks for coming to my TED Talk.
Just a few things. I'm going to try to stick to mostly what we can prove, what we have evidence for, all the stuff that's documented. I'm going to try to avoid conspiracizing or theorizing too much. However, with all history, all good. With all history, there is a certain level of theorizing necessary to come to any conclusion. Because if you're just like reading documents, you know, the history is not necessarily the documents themselves, it's how you interpret them, right? Creation of a narrative. So there will be some theorizing, some conspiracy stuff, but I'm gonna try my best to just stick with the facts. All right, so what do you guys know about the JFK assassination?
Literally nothing.
Nothing? Anyone?
It happened in Dallas, right?
Happened in Dallas?
Happened before I was born.
Me too. Just a couple years before I was born. But no, I'm just kidding.
Just you.
Re-election campaign.
Yeah. The 64 election campaign was like, I think, on the horizon.
He was doing a grassroots movement trying to go down to smaller towns.
What?
Grassroots movement trying to go down to smaller towns.
Yes.
He was going to the south.
Yep. Who killed John F. Kennedy? Do you guys know?
Society.
Society. Lee Harvey Oswald. Anyone know? Okay. So, Lee Harvey Oswald is the person that was blamed for the assassination of JFK. But if you look at like Wikipedia and like articles about it, a lot of times they only call him the alleged assassin. They don't call him the assassin. And the reason for that is because there was no trial. So Lee Harvey Oswald, days after the assassination, was killed in front of a police station by another person before he was tried or convicted or anything like that. And prior to that point, he had basically like denied any involvement in the assassination. He called himself a patsy multiple times, which is not something typical of like political assassins. Typically, political assassins are very like vocal about the reasons why they killed somebody, because obviously they're like making a risk, risking their own life to like shoot somebody, especially someone of like a high status like the president, right? For example, like the person who assassinated Shinzo Abe a couple of years ago, the former prime minister of Japan. He was very outspoken in his reasoning. I mean, his reasoning was kind of about this like cult that Abe was a part of, but that's not really relevant for this. But the reason I bring it up is that typically, like when assassins kill somebody, they're very vocal about their reasons. Now, I'm gonna sit back for a bit. Also, another thing is I'm not gonna get too bogged down into like the forensics and stuff like that about the assassination, because though a lot of it is like really sketchy, and in my opinion, the Warren Commission report, which was the main government report and narrative that was released in '67, 4 years after the assassination, they basically claimed that Lee Harvey Oswald was the sole assassin and provided like a narrative and like a forensic narrative as to why that's the case. Even though there's a lot of holes in that where it's like basically all bullshit in my opinion, at least most of it. I don't want to focus too much on forensics, but because I think that the conditions in which led up to the assassination are of much more interest to us, especially in what we're doing here. And lastly, the reason why I'm talking about this at all is because one, it's like one of my interests. I'm really interested in deep politics and deep political events and events that the United States government gives false narratives to. But also because, in my opinion, the JFK assassination, we can learn a lot about it in regards to how power works in America, how American imperialism functions, and how this country historicizes political events. All right, so that's my intro. Let's get started. So this picture here, this was actually one of the first pictures from the JFK administration. So I think this picture was taken like a few days after he was inaugurated, or maybe like a month after he was inaugurated. Has anyone seen this picture before? Besides here?
Oh.
So the context for this picture is that does everyone here know what the CIA is? Okay. So in the Congo, the Congo had recently just been came out of its colonial period. It was just recently a post-colonial state, and the first like post-colonial prime minister that was elected democratically was this guy named Patrice Lumumba. And JFK, in his speeches during his campaign trail in 1960, was using a lot of kind of like light anti-imperialist rhetoric, which was definitely like new for a U.S. president, because United States presidents very obviously, rhetorically speaking, are very much into expansion and imperialism and that kind of thing. So JFK using some kind of like light imperialist rhetoric, saying stuff that like, for example, like, we don't want the United States to go and like conquer Africa, or we don't want the United States to go and mess stuff with like Latin America and that kind of thing, which obviously we did. But him saying that we don't want to do that was definitely a rhetorical shift when compared to the way that other U.S. leaders were talking about it at the time and before. So JFK, I believe, named Lumumba by name and said that like, we're not going to mess with the Congo. We want to support the Congo and its development as a democratic power. So when our friends at the Central Intelligence Agency heard that, they freaked out a little bit. And basically, the main goal of the CIA is to maintain U.S. hegemony around the world. So basically be like the liaison in control of all of the U.S.'s kind of like satellite states. So the CIA has toppled like dozens of democratic governments all around the world. They've been involved in probably like over 100 countries. I don't know the exact numbers, but so they've toppled the governments of Guatemala, Chile, Italy, Iran, Indonesia, some other ones, I don't know if you guys know.
Colombia, I think.
Colombia, Nicaragua, Hawaii, well, not Hawaii, that was before.
Ecuador.
What?
Ecuador.
Ecuador, El Salvador, Venezuela, Cuba. Well, they tried with Cuba, they failed. And tons of other ones that like I don't remember off the top of my head. But you know, if it's a country that's what Americans refer to as "quote unquote" the third world, the CIA is probably like fucked with it in some way. But so basically, when they heard that this guy over here was into some kind of light anti-imperialism, was into what democracy actually stands for, not what the U.S. government kind of uses democracy for, which is, you know, sovereign nations, the people of sovereign nations democratically ruling their own land and not being tied to entities like the CIA. They freaked out. And so, 30 days before JFK was inaugurated, this was still during the Eisenhower administration, I believe. So this was like 60, I think 1960 or so. 30 days before JFK was inaugurated, the CIA went and assassinated Patrice Lumumba of the Congo. JFK did not know about this assassination until after he was elected into office, about a month later. And this is the picture of him on the phone with somebody when he was told that Patrice Lumumba was assassinated. So I wanted to start the lecture with this picture because it's really important to know that there are several elements within our government that don't always communicate with each other and all have different degrees of power and different agendas at different times. A lot of them also do collaborate to do certain things from time to time. But naturally speaking, the way that power works, there's going to be certain people with certain agendas at certain times, right? I'm going to bring up a book really quick. I highly recommend reading this book. It's a little big, but it's called The Devil's Chessboard. This is written by David Talbot, and the full title is Allen Dulles, the CIA, and the Rise of America's Secret Government. And I think that of many examples that we can give of the fact that we have a secret government, of which from now on I'm going to refer to as the deep state, the fact that we have a deep state is evident in the fact that we have events like this, where the CIA intentionally undermines a sitting president's intentions by assassinating a leader that he wanted to negotiate with. that's just one of several examples. And this is all documented, by the way. Like I'm saying, everything I've said so far is documented. We have the facts. We know the CIA was office, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And if there's any questions at any time, please just let me know, and I can like tell you my sources or whatever. So yeah, no problem with that. Okay, so let's get started. So before I get to the actual assassination, there's some things that we need to talk about first. Some of the major players that were involved in groups and stuff like that, because I think that well, we can kind of get bogged down into the forensics, which I will a little bit, but not too much. It's a lot more important to know who was motivated to do so, when they were motivated to do so, and why they were motivated to do so. Motivation is much more important, in my opinion, when creating a narrative about a conspiratorial narrative, right? So, who were the main factors? How's it going, man?
How's it going?
Good. So who are the main factors, the main elements? The first one, I think the obvious one, would be the CIA. Now, we know that the way the CIA operates, can I help you?
I just want to listen.
Okay, cool. I'm doing a JFK Assassination Teach-in. If you just want like a chair or something, I can. Okay.
I understand.
Cool. So the main elements, the CIA being the first one. So the way the CIA operates is that there are different tiers in terms of who knows what at what time. So it works out kind of like a need-to-know basis. So it could be the fact that even the director at the time may not know the details of all the current operations going on. And that's intentionally made that way so that there's plausible deniability if things backfire, like the JFK assassination, right? So, in terms of who was involved, CIA complicity is a tricky thing in this subject because it's really hard to tell how complicit they are. We know for a fact that this is completely it's so documented, it's not even funny. We know for a fact that the CIA was responsible for the cover-up post-assassination. And I can go into that a little bit later when I cover the post-assassination timeline. But in terms of actually how involved with the real the actual proper assassination they were, that's a lot harder to determine. Because again, we don't have all the documents. There's only so much that we do know. However, there is enough that we know in order to build a narrative that on the very least, they were complicit to a certain degree. There's three different levels of this. First, they were complicit. They knew to a certain extent. Maybe some people were involved in the CIA. Maybe the heads didn't know or whatever. However, they were not the primary people responsible for it. The second one is that the assassination was organized by rogue CIA agents that were working not directly under the top of the agency, but kind of more so on their own. And then the last one, and this one is the one that I more lean to, but I'm kind of in between the rogue agents and this next one I'm about to say, is that the CIA were one of the main orchestrators of the assassination, and specifically the director of the CIA at the time, the ex-director of the CIA, Alan Dulles, who's kind of referred to as the godfather of the CIA, was one of the main people that were organizing the assassination. So that's one party that was involved. And the why, I've already kind of started talking about, but basically, JFK was, they were scared of him because they didn't really know how to read him or how to control him. And in terms of his anti-imperialist rhetoric, that went directly against what the CIA was advocating for. So, some of the other elements that were involved in the assassination. The mafia, the Italian mafia, to a certain extent the Jewish mafia, but most of the Italian mafia, and a Sicilian mob. So, what kind of, what were their motivations behind it? So, a big thing that you're going to learn is the Cuba connection between the JFK assassination and Cuba. But basically, do you guys know what the Bay of Pigs was? So just a quick refresher on that. In 1961, the CIA led a invasion of the Cuban island, and it was kind of like, so the narrative they put out was that like Cubans like rose up by themselves to get rid of the Castro regime because like they were like thinking he was like oppressive or whatever, and this was all run by like, you know, anti-Castro Cubans. There's no like American involvement in it whatsoever, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously that was not the case. In fact, the first day of the Bay of Pigs invasion, like the newspapers knew that that story was bullshit, and that the CIA basically like organized the whole thing. Now, this invasion of Cuba was actually in the works for maybe like a few years prior to JFK's inauguration. It was in the works under the Eisenhower administration, and Eisenhower actually okayed it. And the reason for that was because, as I'm sure you all know, in 1959, Fidel Castro overthrew the fascist dictator Batista and installed a new regime in Cuba that was first kind of leftist, then socialist, and then communist. Sorry. Wait. So then.
You're so funny. Aren't you so funny?
Okay. So then, in terms of the invasion, the day of the invasion, we send 4,000 kind of like Cuban, anti-Castro Cuban expats, as well as army people and CIA people that were like undercover to invade the island of Cuba. And during that time, Alan Dulles and the CIA were trying to put pressure on the presidency, the executive branch, and the Joint Chiefs of Staff to start an air raid over Cuba. Because they viewed basically like when they invaded, like the invasion was like a total shit show. Like everyone was underprepared. Like the Cubans just like totally like smoked them. It was like really pathetic. But they were saying that, okay, like if we get air support, then maybe things will be better. But the actual entirety of the Bay of Pigs was orchestrated by the CIA in order to get JFK to be complicit in the invasion. JFK agreed to the invasion, and I'm gonna kind of get into this later. John Kennedy was no saint. Like, he was not a good person. I mean, no U.S. president, in my opinion, is a good person. I'll get into that later. But basically, JFK knew about the assassination. Knew about the invasion beforehand, was down for it, but under the big caveat that the U.S. could not be at least like visibly directly involved. Obviously, they were all behind everything, like underneath, like on like the DL, but he didn't want the U.S. to be explicitly like the face of it. So Alan Dulles and the CIA wanted to pressure JFK into doing a full-scale military invasion of Cuba, to the point where certain theorists and historians think that the reason why the Bay of Pigs failed, the only reason they sent like 4,000 people there in the first place, which is like such like a low and like dumb amount to like try to take over an entire country, you know, even a small one like Cuba, the failure was intentional. That's what a lot of people try to say, because they wanted to pressure JFK into doing the airstrikes and to eventually, to save face, doing a full-scale military invasion. JFK refused to do that. To his credit, he refused to do that. He said, okay, no military, no air support, no military, it's done. And because of that, he was blamed by the CIA, by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, by the Mafia, and also by the Cuban expats for the failure of the Bay of Pigs invasion. So, keep the Bay of Pigs in mind, because it's a key moment in JFK's presidency that basically aligned all of these other forces against him. Now, I talked about the CIA already. I touched on the Mafia a little bit. I'm gonna go a little bit more into the Mafia. So, what were the Mafia doing prior to the Castro Revolution in Cuba? They had all these amazing casinos that they were exploiting the people of Cuba with. None of that money actually went to any of the people. It was all kind of like, you know, lining the pockets of the Batista regime and also the Mafia members themselves. So I think they built I don't know when they built the casinos, it's probably like in the 1950s, but obviously when Fidel Castro came and took over the country, he like tore them all down, or at least shut them all down. So naturally, the mafia had some beef with Fidel Castro, but because of that, I forget who approached who. I think it was the CIA. So the CIA approached the mafia and were like, hey, do you want to like help us out with the whole assassinating Fidel Castro thing? And they were like, hell yeah, I'm super fucking down. So a lot of people don't know this, but yeah, the FBI and the CIA worked directly with the mafia for a lot of different things, but especially in the attempts against Fidel Castro's life. For context, you can look this up, this is true. There were 638 assassination attempts against Fidel Castro by the CIA, and all of them failed. And it's really funny. It's really funny because some of them get so ridiculous that it's kind of like a Looney Tunes cartoon. Like, for example, like, one of them was that like they wanted to like put like a bomb in like Fidel Castro's cigar to like explode. Another one, they wanted to like poison him so that his beard fell off and he looked like less masculine. Another one was they sent a female spy to Cuba to try to like seduce him and kill him, but Fidel Castro actually seduced her instead, and like they became like lovers for a little bit. This is all true. This is true. You can look it up. This is completely true. It's stranger than fiction. But yeah, so you would think that like just like by accident they would have killed him at least one of the 638 times, right? And those are just the ones that we know of. There's probably even more that like we just don't know of. But yeah, so the mafia had beef, the CIA had beef, the mafia and the CIA were boys, right? Obviously, the anti-Castro Cubans were also, down with this, right? So we kind of see like the cross-pollination between all these different groups, right? So the CIA, the mafia, and the anti-Castro Cubans, right? They're all kind of running in the same circles. They're all kind of down with the cause. What's going on? Eventually, some of these people get together and they start discussing assassination. So, that's kind of like the motivation behind it all. It was a combination of a lot of different things, a lot of different factors. Those are like most of the key ones relating to like Cuba and American imperialism. So for the CIA, Kennedy like kind of posed a threat to the sanctity of U.S. hegemony around the world. Because of like the talks of like anti-imperialism, they viewed him as like a threat. The greatest irony is, and like even Noam Chomsky says this, that at heart JFK was an anti-communist. He was like a rabid anti-communist. Like he hated communism just as much as like Nixon or Reagan or any of the conservatives, right? But he was also slightly more liberal than them, and he viewed that continuing imperialism all over the world would put them in the same place that Britain was after World War II, for example, where after World War II they were basically just like screwed because like they couldn't like control any of their territories anymore, and they all just kind of like went under. And like in terms of history, right? Obviously, like we now kind of look at, well, not entirely, maybe not as much as we should, but a lot of people look at the British Empire in a negative light. So yeah, okay. So that's kind of the background. I guess we can get into like the assassination proper right now. That's another slide. Okay, so this is a map of Dealey Plaza. This is the place where JFK was assassinated. It's in Dallas, Texas. Hey. So, what was happening around this time? Does anyone know? Like, 63, political context. Does anyone like know like what was going on in general?
Civil rights movement?
A little before that. This is a little before the civil rights movement.
Okay.
Though definitely like there was like murmurings of it, and it was like definitely like beginning like around this time. But that's like more like mid to late 60s. Yeah. Yep, the Cold War. There you go. Yeah, it's like the height of the Cold War. So the Bay of Pigs invasion happened. Do you guys know what the Cuban Missile Crisis was, more or less? Yeah. So like,
Iran Contra.
yeah, that's the 80s. That's like you're good. So yeah, eventually things got to a point where certain people in our government and outside and everywhere in between decided that JFK had to go. And there was actually one assassination attempt of JFK prior to the one in Dallas. I think it was in Florida, or I think it was Florida. I think it was Miami, where because obviously like that's where like a lot of the Cuban like expats were, so like that was going to be like a really good location for that. They got caught, like didn't really work out, so that didn't happen. But I'm going to get into some of the evidence in terms of like CIA complicity and evidence in terms of conspiracy like in general now. So, also key thing I forgot to mention, Alan Dulles, the former director of the CIA, was fired after the Bay of Pigs invasion failed. So he has also personal beef with Kennedy. He has quotes against Kennedy saying that like, you know, this like kid like doesn't know what he's talking about, like he just like a child or whatever, like I should be the one in charge, that kind of thing, you know. Anyway, he has like personal beef against him. So how do I want to do this? I guess I'll just like go generally speaking over like the events of the day. So basically, JFK's like presidential motorcade was driving through Dallas in this very, very open area called David Plaza. I mean, you can see like how there's all these like potentials for sniping spots, like right here, or here, or here, or here, or here, or here, or here, there. It's very open, very unsecure. He was also driving with his limousine uncovered, so his head was exposed to the whole world. Obviously, there's a lot of issues safety-wise with that, and you would think that people would know that there was, because they didn't actually know. They did actually know there was safety issues. However, Alan Dulles, former head of the CIA, met with the head of what's it called? The Secret Service, the like presidential's like bodyguards. So Alan Dulles met with the head of the Secret Service, I forget his name, like in the weeks prior to the assassination. We know they met, I think, in Georgetown, and then the week of the assassination, that Secret Service guy, instead of being the lead detail for this Dealey Plaza thing, was sent to like Japan for a week. It's kind of weird. So he just wasn't there. Alan Dulles wasn't there, obviously, either. Yeah, I think that like there was something about the presidential motorcade, like it being not closed, that was like a mistake. I don't remember exactly the details for that. They were actually very understaffed that day too. No one really knew what was going on. But basically, what happened that day, JFK's motorcade came from down here. This way, this street, down this street. And then right around, like, I think 3 or so, is when the first shots began to ring out. So a lot of people, the common narrative, the one the government says, is that there was 3 shots fired, and they were all fired from this location right here, 9. That's the Texas School Book Depository. That's where the government says that Lee Harvey Oswald had his Carcano rifle and shot 3 shots at the motorcade from there. Like that. A few things about that. They're a little weird. So, the line of sight is actually blocked by these trees over here. Not that it makes the shot impossible, but it's a lot more difficult. It's kind of hard to shoot at a car that's driving away from you. So why would you decide to shoot from there while being blocked by trees? Doesn't really make sense, especially considering that the motorcade was literally driving towards him earlier. So, because the motorcade would be like this, you know, anywhere here or right there would have been really good because he's directly under and he's driving at that speed. Kind of the weird thing, I think like just before the shots rang out or just during, the driver like hit the brakes on the car for some reason. Like you typically, if you hear gunshots, you want to like know why you hit the brakes. Anyway, so why would Oswald, assuming he's the shooter, shoot as the car is driving away? The only like logical explanation for that is if there are multiple shooters at the scene. So the main place where people say there was a second or third shooter was at the grassy knoll right here, number 3. And also number 4. I forget what this house is called. But so there, and there provides like basically triangulates on the motorcade, right? Because you now have a cover from all angles. Shooting JFK from the Schoolboy Depository is very hard. Shooting him from, so let's say this is where his motorcade is, this empty car. We'll just pretend this is there. If you're at 3 or behind like a Spencer over there, it's really easy to get a shot from there. If you're at 4, really easy to get a shot. You have them from both sides, right? And then you have the distraction shots, which are over here. So you might be thinking, oh, okay, so like, you know, if the shooters were like 3 or 4, why does like no one talk about that? Like, why are they not on a report or stuff like that? The funny thing is, like, there are like over like a dozen witnesses that both heard and saw a shooter that was at 3. There are multiple witnesses that saw that they saw smoke coming out of the fences at 3, the grassy knoll. There are multiple witnesses that say they heard shots coming from 3, the grassy knoll. Also, nearly all the witnesses say that they heard more than 3 shots. Now, there's a few like logical explanations for this. One is echoing. So when a gunshot is heard, it can like echo, and you can think there's multiple gunshots. But considering how many witnesses heard more than 3, it's very unlikely, like significantly more than 3. It's very unlikely that you could just kind of like explain that away as like merely an echo. So we have 2 potential locations for shooters. We have Oswald and there. So obviously we don't have proof, like definitive proof, that there was a shooter there and a shooter there, except for all the witnesses that said so. But witness testimony has always been sketchy, and that's like one of the main problems with like the legal justice system in America, among many of them, is that witnesses can easily change their minds or be persuaded, or whatever, right? However, there's also a video of the assassination that was made. It's called the Zapruder film. And for about 10 or 20 years, it was like tucked and hidden away in like a CIA vault that no, they didn't allow anyone to show until I think it was like 71 or 75 during the House Assassinations Committee on Investigations, which was this congressional effort to like expose some of like the CIA assassinations, both like domestically and abroad. And only then did the Zapruder film become public. I'm not going to show it because like I don't want to. You guys probably don't want to see someone's head getting blown off. But basically, I mean, I'll summarize it. JFK is driving. He hits this road sign right here, and then after the road sign, his head explodes, basically, right? He's driving this way, and it's like actually look a better way to describe it. So I'm gonna see if I pull up a picture. Okay. I'll try not to find like a bloody one. That's not bad. You guys see this? Okay. So these are 3 images from the Zapruder film. So you can see JFK is driving this way. So over here and to the left is basically like directly behind him is the Texas Schoolboy Depository, which is where the government says that the shooter was, Lee Harvey Oswald. I recommend watching the video. Obviously, if you don't want to watch it because it's someone's head blowing one off, I totally understand. But I'll describe it to you now. Basically, when JFK is shot, his head goes back and to the left, like this. Just logically speaking, if someone shoots me in like the back of the head, where would your head go?
Forward. Or
Yeah. So some people say it's like, oh, it's like a shockwave thing or whatever. But multiple people say that they've heard the shots coming from like the left or to the right, not necessarily from the back. So in the video itself, which again was like not available for 20 years, you see JFK's head like go in a direction that's completely the opposite of where like the supposed bullets are coming from. If his head is going back into the left, that means that he was getting shot either from like the front over here or like the side like over like here-ish. Something like that. So those are like most of the forensics. It doesn't really make any sense in terms of like how it happened. In terms of also the doctor's report, a lot of weird fuckery happened there. So like there were like several doctors in the building. Several of them testified that like JFK's gunshot wound was like at the back of his neck, like right here, which obviously doesn't make any sense. That's like the entry wound, right? So obviously that doesn't make any sense if I'm sorry, no, I got that mixed up. So his entry wound was at the front of his throat, like right here, and the exit wound was like in his back, like somewhere over here. So that doesn't really make any sense if someone's shooting you from behind. Typically, if you're someone shooting you from behind, the entrance wound's going to be from behind you, not in front of you. All the doctors were basically told to like leave, and then like people in suits came and like took the whole thing over. Multiple doctors came out years later, including like in this documentary that came out I think last year or this year, called like JFK What the Doctors Saw, and they basically said that like the whole thing, the whole doctor's report was like doctored on there, and thank you. And that like the actual entry wound and exit wound were moved by somebody from after the doctors had initially seen them. And you can like look the autopsy photos online if you want. If you want to see someone's brains, then you can.
I was gonna say, goddamn.
Doesn't really make any sense.
Now, why would you do that?
Yeah. What are the other things about the... Oh yeah, also, in the Warren Commission report, which is the official narrative that the government wrote about the JFK assassination, the entry and exit wounds are actually... So we can see like some of the drafts of the Warren Commission report from before it was published officially. And in some of the notes, they're like actively changing like where the entry and exit wounds were, which is kind of weird because like you would think that a fact like that would be pretty like locked down even on the first draft, right? And it's funny, we actually know like one of the people that was moving around the entry and exit wounds. That person was Gerald Ford, who, if you don't know, became president after Nixon resigned from office in 1973 or 4. I think 3, maybe 2. Anyway, so yeah, he was actually on the Warren Commission. So yeah, okay, so that's the forensics. That's the background. That's why. Let's talk about Lee Harvey Oswald for a second. What do you guys know about Lee Harvey Oswald? Anyone?
He allegedly killed JFK.
He allegedly killed JFK. Yes.
And like died
And
days
died,
after.
Yeah.
He died like literally days after. Yep. Yep.
Well, yeah, was never put on trial or anything.
Yeah. This picture of him getting shot.
Oh shit.
Yeah. Okay.
The hat.
That's Lee Harvey Oswald. That's Lee Harvey Oswald. That's Jack Ruby, his assassin. Oswald's a really interesting guy for a lot of reasons. So in the official government narrative, they said that his dedication to Marxism was the reason why he assassinated JFK, because he wanted to support the Cuban Revolution, because JFK was responsible for the Bay of Pigs. That was the official thing. It doesn't really make sense for a few reasons. First of all, he was formal naval intelligence. When he was 19 years old, he did a like Russian language aptitude test, and then a few years later, he just went to Moscow, which is kind of weird. So the whole like Oswald and Moscow thing is kind of interesting because obviously the government used it to say that like oh, he might have talked to the KGB here, and like, oh, he became more of a Marxist here. And good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is like, the formation of his Marxism or whatever. Before he went to the USSR, he talked to like an American ambassador, and he was like, hi, my name is Lee Harvey Oswald. Here is my passport. I'm gonna go defect to Moscow, and oh yeah, by the way, I used to be in the Navy, and I'm gonna tell him a bunch of secrets. And they were like, all right, bet, and they let him go. It's kind of weird. You don't usually let people do that, especially like during the height of the Cold War, right? Also, he came back to the United States 2 years after his defection with like his new wife, Marina, which again, for someone that said, hey, here is my passport, I'm going to defect to the Soviet Union and tell them military secrets, that's kind of weird, because usually visas for normal people take a long time, but for defectors, you don't get them at all. So yeah, he came back like, and it was fine. And then when he came back, he was kind of messing around in New Orleans. He joined this thing called the, I forget the name of it, but it was basically this like leftist organization that was like for like a free Cuba. He was like distributing like pamphlets and stuff like that. But at the same time that he was distributing pamphlets for this like free Cuba organization, thank you, have a good one. For this free Cuba organization, he also was working for this right-wing investigator named, damn, I forget his name. Maybe it'll come to me later. But basically, it was this like ex-CIA guy, or this guy that had worked with the CIA in the past and would continue to do so. He had this like he had this like private detective office in New Orleans that was next to like all the big like CIA, naval intelligence and government buildings and stuff like that, the intelligence quarter. And that building had two entrances. The first one was like the main entrance. The second one was like the fake entrance for like, people that were assets and stuff like that. So Lee Harvey Oswald was like documented like entering that building several times and like talking to that guy. Which is kind of funny because like if he was a genuine Marxist and like distributing pamphlets about a free Cuban liberation, he probably wouldn't be like buddy-buddy with like this CIA guy that like, wanted to assassinate Castro. So that's a little weird, right? Some other things that don't really make sense about Oswald. The CIA knew about him as far back as 1959, and we're reading his letters as far back as 1959. He was one of the main people that was being surveilled by what's his name? James Jesus Angleton. And this really good book by Jefferson Morley called The Ghost. It talks about the fact that James Jesus Angleton, who was like one of the chiefs of counterintelligence at the CIA, was surveilling him as far back as 1959, which that basically confirms the fact that the CIA knew who Lee Harvey Oswald was at least 4 years before the assassination, if not longer, probably longer. And that also confirms the fact that they actively lied to Congress and the American people about the fact that they had no involvement and or they did not know about Oswald, because they said that several times. Yeah, what else is there? Well, we can talk about the way that Oswald was killed, which is kind of weird. So, like I said before, he's called the alleged assassin because he never admitted to assassinating him. He would constantly call himself a patsy. He would say that, like, there's something here against me, like, I don't know what's going on. This guy Jack Ruby comes up a few days after he's arrested and shoots him in front of a police station. Or actually, he was behind a police station. On live TV, by the way. You can go watch this video on YouTube. It's fucking crazy. So Jack Ruby said officially the reason why he shot Oswald was to spare Jackie Kennedy the kind of like stress that would come about from like the full investigation. Which, I can kind of like admire his chivalry in that regard. But the weird thing is that he had ties to both the Italian and Jewish mafia, and he was like one of the biggest like club owners in Dallas during that time. Like he was working with like mafia guys all the time to do like shady shit. Which also we know that they had a lot of like stuff on him because like he was kind of like a dumb guy and very much kind of involved with that whole shady scene. So there's a lot of like dirt on him already. So like we don't know for a fact exactly what was leveraged to get him to do this, but something probably was. He's actually seen in a video, I think a few months before Lee Harvey Oswald's assassination. He's in one of those like free Cuba meetings, I think, with Oswald in the video. He's just like chilling in the back. It's kind of weird. But anyway, yeah. So basically, like, he shoots Oswald. He's chilling in jail. One day, he's visited by this man named Jolly West. Now, Jolly West is a fascinating individual. Until recently, we didn't know this, but until recently, it only came out that he was one of the lead architects of the MK Ultra experiments. And I'm not going to go into the whole MK Ultra thing because it's super complicated. But essentially, the MK Ultra experiments were CIA-led brainwashing experiments in which they doused American civilians, knowingly or unknowingly, with LSD in order to try to brainwash them. Now, Jolly West was one of the main people in charge of the MK Ultra experiments.